Hello everyone, a warm and heartfelt welcome to our channel. We're so glad you're here with us today. Before we begin, let me offer a short, beautiful prayer for you. May your heart be filled with peace, your days with joy, and your soul with love. May you always find strength in the hardest moments and light even in the darkest times. May love surround you and happiness follow you wherever you go. Now get ready to be swept away by a story filled with deep emotions, intense passion, and heartwarming moments. You won't want to miss a second of this beautiful journey, so make sure to stay until the very end. If you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another incredible story. Now let's dive right in. Shane Williams stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his luxurious penthouse, the glittering cityscape stretching beneath him like a kingdom he had conquered. He was the definition of power and wealth, a ruthless, calculating man who had built an empire from nothing, clawing his way to the top through sheer determination and a merciless attitude toward business. His name commanded respect and fear in every corporate boardroom, and his fortune ensured he never heard the word no. But despite his unimaginable wealth, Shane knew there was one thing money alone couldn't guarantee: an heir, a child to inherit his empire and carry on the Williams legacy. Love was an illusion to Shane, a weakness that destroyed men and left them vulnerable. He had watched his father crumble under the weight of a broken heart, watched his mother waste away in bitterness and regret. Shane had promised himself he would never fall into that trap. He didn't need love, he needed control, and he would secure his legacy through calculated decisions, not emotional entanglements. That was why he had decided on a contract marriage. Strictly business, no strings attached, no emotions. Just a legal agreement that would give him the heir he needed without the complications of a real marriage. His assistant, Charles, had handled the details, carefully selecting candidates who fit the profile Shane demanded. Attractive, healthy, and willing to sign away any claim to emotional connection. And then Charles mentioned Alina, a woman of striking beauty, with smooth brown skin that glowed under the light, stylish braided hair framing her delicate face, and wide eyes that seemed to see through even the hardest exterior. Alina's father had gambled away everything they owned, leaving her in ruin and desperation. She was the perfect candidate. She needed the money. Shane needed an heir, a transaction, nothing more. Shane had summoned her to his penthouse that evening. When she arrived, dressed simply yet elegantly in a fitted dress that highlighted her curves without trying too hard, Shane felt an unexpected flicker of interest beneath his cold exterior. She was stunning. Standing nervously in front of him, her hands clasped together, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear and quiet strength. Shane wasted no time with small talk. "I'll pay you $20 million to give me a child," he said, his voice sharp and devoid of warmth. No emotional involvement, just business. Alina's breath hitched. Her gaze flicked toward the luxurious surroundings, the marble floors, the expensive artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline. It was more wealth than she could comprehend, but behind Shane's wealth was a coldness that made her chest tighten. Her father had destroyed their lives with his reckless gambling, leaving them homeless and drowning in debt. She had struggled for months, working multiple jobs just to keep food on the table, to protect her younger brother from the harsh reality of their downfall. And now this, a lifeline disguised as a proposition, a contract marriage with a man who didn't even pretend to care about her as a person. Her pride screamed at her to walk away, but the memory of her brother's hollow cheeks and her mother's tears made her stay rooted to the spot. "20 million, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Shane's gaze didn't waver. "The contract ends once the child is born. You'll have no further obligations. The child will be mine." His tone was so cold, so calculated, it made her stomach twist. Alina hesitated. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly what this meant. He wanted her body, her womb, but not her heart. She would be nothing more than a vessel to secure his legacy, a transactional pawn in his high-stakes game of power and control. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her mind raced with the consequences, morally, emotionally. But then she thought of her family's suffering, the crushing debt, the hopelessness of their future. This was the only way out. Shane watched her, his expression unreadable. He didn't care about her reasons. He needed an heir, and she was the perfect solution. Slowly, Alina lifted her gaze to meet his eyes, her heart hammering in her chest. "I'll do it," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the decision. A flicker of surprise crossed Shane's features before his mask of cold indifference slid back into place. "Good," he said simply. "We'll begin the legal process tomorrow." Alina felt her knees weaken beneath her, but she held herself steady. She was stepping into a world where love didn't exist, where she would be nothing more than a contract, but she would survive it. She had to. Shane turned away from her, already moving toward the window, as if the conversation were nothing more than another business deal. But as Alina stood there, her heart pounding painfully in her chest, Shane's words lingered in the air like a dark promise. A contract sealed not with affection, but with cold calculation. Neither of them knew that this agreement, this cold, heartless transaction, would unravel their lives in ways they never anticipated. That beneath Shane's steel exterior lay a heart capable of feeling, and beneath Alina's quiet strength lay a vulnerability that would ultimately crack through Shane's walls. But for now they were strangers, bound by a contract, and Alina knew, once she crossed this line, there would be no turning back. The wedding. The wedding was a grand affair, a display of wealth and power, orchestrated to perfection. Yet it was utterly devoid of warmth and emotion. The venue was the most prestigious hall in the city, its vaulted ceilings adorned with cascading white roses and crystal chandeliers that reflected the soft glow of candlelight. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from the rare orchids imported from Japan to the gold-trimmed dinnerware lining the polished mahogany tables. Hundreds of guests, the city's elite and most powerful figures, were seated in rows, their eyes trained toward the altar where Shane Williams stood like a statue carved from ice. Dressed in a tailored black suit that hugged his tall, broad frame perfectly, Shane's expression was unreadable, cold, impassive, and entirely devoid of emotion. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room without interest, his hands clasped in front of him as though this was nothing more than another business transaction. And for Shane, it was. He wasn't marrying for love or companionship. He was securing an heir, fulfilling a calculated plan to ensure his legacy. His heart was an impenetrable fortress, and no one, especially not Alina, would be allowed to breach it. As the orchestra shifted to a soft, melodic tune, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall opened. All heads turned toward the entrance, and the room fell into a hushed silence as Alina stepped into the light. She was breathtaking, dressed in a silk gown that clung to her slender figure and shimmered under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Alina looked like a goddess descended from the heavens. Her smooth brown skin glowed with a natural radiance, and her stylish braided hair cascaded down her back like a crown. Her wide, dark eyes reflected vulnerability and strength as she walked slowly down the aisle, her delicate hands clutching a bouquet of white roses. Her heart pounded in her chest, a painful rhythm that echoed through her entire body. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, but it was Shane's gaze that pierced through her soul. He watched her with a cool detachment, his blue eyes icy and distant, betraying nothing. Not admiration, not warmth, not even mild curiosity. It was as if he were watching a business deal unfold, rather than his own wedding. Alina's steps faltered for a brief moment as doubt surged through her. Was she making a mistake? Could she really live with a man who had no intention of loving her? Who had made it painfully clear that this was a contract, not a marriage? But then the image of her younger brother's hollow cheeks and her mother's tear-streaked face flashed through her mind. She had no choice. Her family's survival depended on this agreement. Summoning her strength, Alina lifted her chin and continued down the aisle, her gaze locked on Shane's expressionless face. When she reached him, Shane extended his hand toward her with mechanical precision. His hand was large, his grip firm, but devoid of warmth. The officiant began to speak, his voice carrying over the silent hall. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Shane Williams and Alina." Alina barely registered the words as her heart hammered painfully in her chest. Her fingers trembled in Shane's grasp, but his hold remained steady, impersonal. When the officiant asked Shane the fateful question, "Do you, Shane Williams, take Alina to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Shane's gaze didn't soften, didn't flicker with the slightest hint of emotion. "I do," he replied, his voice cold and devoid of feeling. Alina's heart sank, but she forced a small smile, even as tears burned the back of her eyes. Then it was her turn. "Do you, Alina, take Shane to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Alina hesitated for a fraction of a second before her lips parted. "I do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The officiant smiled. "You may now kiss the bride." Shane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He leaned in, his hand brushing against Alina's jawline as his lips met hers in the briefest of touches. His lips were cold, impersonal, lacking the tenderness Alina had always imagined a wedding kiss would hold. When he pulled away, his gaze remained hard, impassive. The guests applauded politely, but the hollowness of the moment settled deep within Alina's chest. The wedding night. That night, the atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with tension and unspoken anticipation. Alina sat at the edge of the massive king-size bed, her heart racing wildly in her chest as the cool night air filtered through the open balcony doors, stirring the sheer white curtains that framed the vast windows overlooking the glittering cityscape below. The silence between them was deafening, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic far beneath them. Shane stood near the window, his tall, commanding frame silhouetted against the pale moonlight. He had discarded his jacket, his crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the taut lines of his chiseled chest beneath. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, and his piercing blue eyes were trained on the city lights beyond the glass. But Alina could feel the weight of his attention, even from across the room. Her heart thudded painfully as she sat there, her slender fingers clutching the edge of the satin bedsheet. She was acutely aware of the thin silk nightgown that clung to her curves, leaving her smooth brown shoulders exposed. The air felt charged, her skin tingling with nervous anticipation. As Shane finally turned toward her, his gaze dark and hooded, he crossed the room with slow, measured steps, the sound of his polished shoes echoing softly against the marble floor. Alina's breath hitched when he stopped in front of her, towering over her seated form, his presence so commanding that she felt the heat radiating from his body. Shane's expression remained hard, but there was something else beneath the surface, a flicker of something deeper that Alina couldn't quite decipher. Slowly, he reached out and brushed a loose braid away from her face, his thumb trailing down the soft curve of her jaw. Alina shivered beneath his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a brief moment before opening to meet his intense gaze. "Relax," Shane whispered, his voice low and deep, laced with an unmistakable note of seduction. His hand slid down her bare shoulder, his fingers trailing across her smooth skin, igniting a slow burn beneath her surface. Alina's breathing quickened as his hand drifted lower, his thumb brushing the delicate strap of her nightgown. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might leap from her chest. Shane leaned down, his lips ghosting across her jawline, and Alina's body tensed instinctively. His sharp gaze immediately darkened as he sensed the hesitation in her posture. His hands stilled against her skin. "Alina," he murmured, his brow furrowing as he pulled back slightly to study her expression. Alina's cheeks burned under his penetrating gaze, her wide eyes shimmering with uncertainty. "What's wrong?" Shane's voice sharpened with quiet authority. Alina's breath hitched in her throat. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged at first. Finally, her gaze dropped to her lap as her fingers twisted nervously around the edge of the satin sheet. I've never," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Shane's eyes narrowed. "What?" he demanded softly. Alina forced herself to look up at him, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I've never been with anyone before," she confessed, her voice trembling. "You're my first." Shane's entire body went still. His breath caught sharply, his chest rising and falling as he stared at her in disbelief. "You're a virgin." His voice was low, strained, as though the revelation had knocked the breath from his lungs. Alina nodded shyly, her gaze lowering once more. Shane's jaw tensed, his hand running roughly through his dark hair as he stepped back, putting space between them. His mind spun, struggling to process what he had just heard. He had assumed Alina had experience. After all, why else would she agree to such a contract? He had approached this arrangement with the cold detachment of a business transaction, never once considering that Alina might be untouched, unmarked by any other man's hands. A wave of something unfamiliar twisted in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name: protectiveness, guilt, a sharp and sudden need to shield her from the very situation he had put her in. His hand fell away from his hair as he turned back toward her, his expression clouded with tension. "I didn't expect this," he admitted quietly. Alina's heart constricted painfully at the vulnerability in his voice. "I thought this was just business," Shane added, his gaze dark as he studied her with newfound intensity. Alina's breath trembled past her lips. "It is," she said softly, even as her heart ached beneath the weight of her own words. Shane's eyes flashed with something dangerous, something possessive. "No," he said darkly, "it isn't anymore." He moved toward her again, his hands bracketing her face as he leaned down, his mouth inches from hers. Alina's breath caught as his thumb brushed her lower lip, his gaze searing into hers. "I don't want to hurt you," Shane said hoarsely, his jaw tightening as his control slipped. Alina's lips parted beneath his touch, her heart hammering painfully. "You won't," she whispered, even as uncertainty rippled through her. Shane's breath hitched, his blue eyes darkening further. "You don't understand, Alina," he said roughly, his hands sliding down her arms. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be gentle." Alina's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. Slowly, she reached up and placed her hand over his heart. "Then let me teach you," she whispered. Shane's eyes burned into hers for a long moment before he let out a shaky breath. He leaned in, his lips capturing hers in a slow, lingering kiss. Alina melted beneath him, her arms sliding up around his neck as the kiss deepened. Shane's hands gripped her waist, his touch growing hungrier, needier. But just as quickly, he pulled back, his breath ragged. "Alina," his forehead pressed against hers, "you're so innocent." His hand slid up her back, his grip tightening slightly. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. Alina's fingers slid into his dark hair. "Then let me decide," she whispered. Shane's jaw clenched, and then slowly he pushed her back onto the bed, his body covering hers. "You're mine," he growled against her throat, his lips trailing fire along her skin. Alina gasped beneath him, her fingers digging into his back. "Shane!" He froze at the sound of his name on her lips, his breath ragged as he pulled back to look at her. "Say it again," he demanded roughly. "Shane," Alina whispered, her voice breathless and soft. His eyes darkened further as he leaned down and kissed her again, this time with raw intensity. Alina's heart raced as Shane's hands moved over her body, but even through the rising passion, he remained careful, gentle. His mouth moved to her ear. "I'll make this good for you," he whispered, "but I can't promise I'll stop after tonight." Alina's breath hitched. "I don't want you to stop." Shane's eyes flashed with heat. "Careful, Alina," he said darkly. "You have no idea what you're inviting." But Alina's hands slid down his back, her eyes shining with newfound courage. "Then show me," she whispered. Shane's restraint snapped. He kissed her deeply, his hands sliding over her body with reverence and hunger. Alina's world narrowed to the feel of Shane's mouth, his touch, the raw need in his eyes. And in that moment, the contract, the money, the cold proposition, it all faded away, leaving only the burning connection between them. Later that night, Shane sat in the dark of his study, a glass of whiskey resting loosely between his fingers, the amber liquid swirling as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The night was quiet, but his mind was anything but. Images of Alina plagued him, her wide, innocent eyes, the way her cheeks flushed pink whenever he touched her, the soft gasp of her breath when his lips brushed against her neck. His hand tightened around the glass as frustration and desire coiled tightly in his chest. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, a contract, simple, clean, and emotionless. He had approached it with the cold precision of any other deal: marry her, conceive an heir, and walk away when it was done. But Alina wasn't just some faceless transaction. She was warm, real, and breathtakingly beautiful in a way that seeped into his veins and made it impossible to breathe without thinking about her. The memory of her trembling beneath his hands that night, her innocent confession that she had never been touched before, it haunted him. No woman had ever affected him like this, and it was driving him insane. His jaw clenched as he ran a hand through his dark hair. He needed to control himself, to maintain the distance he had so carefully crafted. But how could he, when the sound of her soft footsteps down the hall sent a primal need surging through his veins? He heard the soft click of the bedroom door opening, and his head turned sharply toward the sound. His gaze narrowed as Alina stepped into the room, wearing a delicate silk nightgown that clung to her curves and left very little to the imagination. The thin straps of the gown slid down her smooth brown shoulders, the hem brushing just below her thighs. Her long braided hair cascaded down her back, and the soft glow of the room's ambient lighting illuminated her golden skin. Shane's eyes darkened dangerously as his gaze swept over her, his body tensing. Alina hesitated, standing just inside the doorway, her wide eyes meeting his across the room. "Shane," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. His eyes flashed as he rose from the leather chair, his tall frame cutting an imposing figure as he crossed the room toward her with slow, measured steps. "Come here," he said, his voice low and edged with quiet authority. Alina's breath hitched, her hands twisting nervously at her sides. "Shane, this is just a contract," she reminded him softly, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. His gaze sharpened, a dangerous glint flickering in the depths of his piercing blue eyes. "I don't care," he growled. In one swift motion, Shane closed the distance between them, his hand sliding to the small of her back as he pulled her flush against his hard chest. Alina gasped, her hands pressing against his chest instinctively, but Shane's grip tightened, his other hand curling around the back of her neck. His breath was hot against her ear as he leaned down, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of her throat. "I need you, Alina," he whispered darkly, her heart hammered wildly in her chest. "This isn't what we agreed to," she murmured, her voice strained, even as her body betrayed her, melting against him. Shane's jaw tensed, his lips grazing her collarbone. "Screw the contract," he growled. His hand slid down her back, his fingers brushing over the curve of her hips as he backed her toward the nearest wall. Alina's breath hitched as her back pressed against the cool surface. Shane's body crowded hers, his hands braced on either side of her head as his dark gaze bore into hers. "Tell me you don't want this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell me to stop, and I will." Alina's lips parted, her breath shallow. Her heart screamed at her to push him away, to remind him that this was nothing more than a contract, a means to an end. But her body burned beneath his touch, and her resolve shattered beneath the intensity of his gaze. "Shane," she whispered helplessly, his eyes darkened further. "That's what I thought." He claimed her lips in a bruising kiss, his mouth demanding and possessive. Alina whimpered against his mouth, her hands sliding up to grip the hard muscles of his shoulders. Shane's hand cupped the side of her face, his thumb brushing against her jaw as his kiss deepened. Alina's head spun as his tongue slipped past her lips, tasting her with slow, deliberate strokes. Heat pooled low in her belly as Shane's body pressed flush against hers, his hand trailing down the side of her thigh before hooking beneath her knee and lifting her leg against his hip. Alina's breath broke on a shaky gasp as Shane's mouth moved to her throat, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin there. "You're driving me insane," he growled against her skin, his grip tightening. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you." His mouth trailed lower, his lips brushing over the delicate line of her collarbone. Alina's fingers curled into his hair, her head falling back against the wall as pleasure spiraled through her. "Shane," she breathed. He lifted his head, his intense gaze locking onto hers. "Say my name again," he demanded roughly. "Shane," she whispered. His eyes flashed dangerously, his hand sliding beneath the thin silk of her nightgown. "You have no idea what you've done to me," he said, his voice rough with desire. "No one has ever gotten under my skin like this." His lips hovered just above hers. I wasn't supposed to feel anything for you, he admitted, his voice raw. But now I can't stop thinking about you. Alina's breath hitched. Shane. His mouth claimed hers again in a deep, searing kiss, his hands pulling her even closer. You've ruined me, he growled between kisses. And I don't care. His lips trailed down her throat, his hands skimming over her bare thigh. Alina's heart raced as Shane lifted her into his arms, carrying her toward the bed with effortless strength. He laid her down gently, his large frame covering hers, as he braced himself on his forearms above her. His eyes burned into hers. You make me lose control, he whispered darkly. Alina's hand brushed over the sharp line of his jaw. Then don't hold back, she whispered. Shane's gaze sharpened dangerously. Careful, Alina, he warned. I don't know if I can stop once I start. Alina's lips curved in a soft, daring smile. Then don't stop. Shane's breath caught, and for a moment, he just stared at her, his eyes dark with need, his jaw tight with restraint. And then he gave in. His mouth crashed against hers, his hands sliding beneath her nightgown as his body pressed down into hers. Alina's breath broke on a soft moan as Shane's kiss deepened, his touch growing rougher, hungrier. His mouth trailed down her neck, his hands sliding over her curves as Alina arched beneath him. You're mine, Shane growled against her skin. Do you understand? Alina's fingers tangled in his hair as her breath shattered beneath the intensity of his gaze. Yes, she whispered. Shane's eyes darkened. Say it again. I'm yours. Shane's lips curled in a dark, satisfied smile. Good. His mouth descended on hers once more, and this time, there was no hesitation, no restraint. The doctor's smile widened. Congratulations, Mr. Williams. Your wife isn't sick. She's pregnant. Shane's entire body went still. The words echoed in his mind, sharp and deafening. Pregnant. His grip on the chair tightened, knuckles turning white. His breath caught, chest rising and falling in uneven bursts as the doctor's words sank in. Alina was carrying his child. The contract had been fulfilled. So why did his heart feel like it was being ripped in two? Flashback. Earlier. That morning, Alina had been feeling strange for days. Waves of dizziness, nausea that struck without warning, and an unfamiliar heaviness in her body that she couldn't explain. She woke up that morning with a pounding headache and a queasy stomach, clutching the edge of the sink as a wave of nausea hit her so hard that her knees nearly buckled. Shane had found her in the bathroom, her face pale, her hands trembling. Alina! His voice was sharp with concern as he crossed the room and gripped her shoulders. What's wrong? Alina shook her head weakly, trying to steady her breathing. I don't know. I just feel sick. Shane's blue eyes darkened with concern. He didn't hesitate. Without another word, he lifted her into his arms, ignoring her weak protests as he carried her down the hallway. We're going to the doctor, he said firmly. Alina leaned her head against his chest, too dizzy and weak to argue. Present, doctor's office. The ride to the doctor's office had been a blur. Shane held her hand the entire time, his grip steady and reassuring. When they arrived, Shane's tone was sharp as he addressed the receptionist. My wife isn't feeling well. Get the doctor immediately. Alina was taken back for tests while Shane paced the waiting room, his jaw tight, his hands shoved into his pockets. His mind raced, heart pounding painfully against his ribs. He hated this feeling, the helplessness of not being able to fix something with sheer willpower. Alina was fragile, and the idea of something being wrong with her made a cold wave of fear crash through him. When the doctor finally emerged, Shane's head shot up, his blue eyes dark with tension. Mr. Williams? The doctor said with a soft smile. Shane's heart thudded painfully. What is it? Is she okay? The doctor chuckled. More than okay. Congratulations. Your wife is pregnant. Shane's breath left his lungs in a rush. Pregnant. The word echoed in his skull, sharp and unrelenting. This was what he had wanted, what he had paid for. So why did his stomach twist at the thought? Moments later, the car ride home. Alina sat beside him in the car, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the passing cityscape. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Shane's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "You're pregnant," he said finally, his voice rough. Alina nodded slowly, her fingers twisting together. "Yes." His jaw clenched. This changed everything. The contract had been clear. Once she was pregnant, their arrangement was fulfilled. But now the thought of letting her go made his chest burn with something vicious and possessive. "Shane," Alina whispered, her voice trembling. "What happens now?" He turned to look at her, his blue eyes blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Now," he growled, "you stay." Alina's heart stuttered. "But the contract—" "Forget the damn contract," Shane snapped, his hand reaching out to grip hers. "You're not going anywhere." Alina's lips parted in shock. Shane's thumb brushed over her knuckles, his voice dropping to a low, possessive whisper. "You're mine, Alina, and I'm not letting you go." Epilogue. 1 year later, the sound of a baby's laughter filled the penthouse as Shane stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his son cradled in his arms. Little Noah giggled, his tiny fingers wrapping around Shane's thumb. Alina watched from the doorway, her heart swelling at the sight. Shane turned, his blue eyes softening as they met hers. "Come here," he murmured, holding out his free hand. Alina crossed the room, sliding into his embrace as their son cooed between them. Shane's lips brushed against her temple. "Thank you," he whispered. Alina looked up at him, confused. "For what?" Shane's gaze held hers, raw and unguarded. "For ruining my plans." A slow smile curved her lips. Shane leaned down, capturing her mouth in a deep, lingering kiss. The contract had brought them together, but love had made it impossible to let go.